Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Another week of live shows await you right here on Truth Frequency Radio with me, your host, Kev Baker, on The Kev Baker Show, coming to you live from Smart City, Glasgow, all the way over here in Scotland in the UK. And talking of smart cities, just really briefly before we get into this long-awaited show, and I can't wait to get into this stuff today, but I am going to be joined by Pippa King right here on the Kev Baker Show in the next couple of weeks. And Pippa is the one person who is, by freedom of request informations, getting all of the information relevant towards the smart city here in Glasgow. She's just done her very first TED Talk, and I think she spoke on the Kev Baker Show, first of all, and I remember how nervous she was, so it's going to be great to get her back to speak to all of these topics. Now then, I'm getting a little bit of feedback from your end, Mr. Marzulli. I don't know if your speakers are maybe a bit too high or something. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. But this is a show that I have been waiting for some time. And we know that I deal in patterns and synchronicities. Well, I was supposed to hook up with LA a number of weeks ago. And because of time zones and various things that seemed to get in the way, little obstacles that were placed on our trail, then one thing after another, we had to postpone the show. Now, I said at the time, kind of tongue-in-cheek, that I thought maybe perhaps there was a reason for that postponement. Maybe some information would come to light before we got to speak to LA. And totally unplanned on my part is the fact that in recent times, and on the stream on YouTube the other night, we started to get into what I loosely call the greatest story never told. We were looking at reptilian statues, reptilian symbology that span back way, way, way back to the ancient times and are still with us today. It's an indication of almost some supernatural influence, past, present, and going into the future. So that's why today it's going to be brilliant to hook up with L.A. Marzulli. And for anyone who doesn't know L.A., he's an author, a lecturer, a filmmaker. He's penned 12 books, and I'm still getting feedback, Ellie. It's actually quite bad. I don't know if you can hear it at that end, if you can turn your speakers down just a little, maybe. There we go.
You got
it.
Kevin, thanks so much for having me on the show. Really appreciate it. Always good to see you and speak with you. And we will be over in your neck of the woods here around July 6th. So we're excited about that. We're filming in Europe for a number of weeks, all for the series, the film series that we're working on the Trail of the Nephilim, which really factors into what we'll be talking about this evening.
Absolutely. And like I was saying, Ellie, totally unplanned, but I've started to look at the kind of reptilian influence that is there for anyone to see if you bother looking at the statues, looking at the mythology of ancient people. And it's this outside force, call it supernatural, call it alien, call it what you may. This is something that you've been on the trail of for years now. And I'm really interested to get into your recent work, the mathematical mysteries of the mound builders, because I've just finished listening to Graham Hancock's book, America Before. And although that you reach different conclusions, I still add that to the evidence that there's a story here, and it's the greatest one never told, Ellie.
Well, I agree with you. There seems to be a hidden history that has been deliberately obfuscated from the peoples of the world. It's a managed agenda, and we have artifacts. We have, and the artifacts are global. I mean, they're not only in the Americas; they're all throughout Europe. We have dolmens. We have ancient structures. We have granite that's found above the king's chamber in the pyramid. Well, that was carved out from Aswan, which is 500 miles away. And these granite blocks are the size of railroad cars. How the heck were they transported from Aswan down to the Great Pyramid? We have advanced mathematics that we see embedded in the Newark Circle Mound and the Newark Octagon Mound in Newark, Ohio, which is really in some ways the basis of our film, Mathematical Mysteries of the Mound Builders. What we discovered, Kevin, is that there's advanced geometry, trigonometry, that's embedded in these earthworks. And the Octagon Mound, as I just mentioned, is not a simple octagon. It's a complex octagon. And it's huge. I mean, speaking of the Great Pyramid, you could fit the base of the Great Pyramid. You could nestle that very easily in the area that comprises the octagon mound. That's how big this thing is. And it begs the question, why are they doing this? I mean, why not something a tenth of its size or a 20th of its size? Why do they feel the need to make something so absolutely humongous, which is what the octagon and the circle mound is in Newark, Ohio? The amount of tonnage of dirt to actually create those edifices, in my opinion, would exceed 500,000 tons of earth.
And Ellie, something on that scale, it just cannot be appreciated from the ground. And something else like that, in my opinion, looking at some of the pictures, is the Serpent Mound. And it's almost as if whoever did build these structures, they were very, very aware of how they would look from the air. And in fact, they're best viewed from the air, in my opinion.
Well, you mentioned the Serpent Mound, and we drilled into that. We reference it in all three films. The third film, Secrets of a Supernatural, Voices from the Other Side, will be coming out sometime in July. I'll finish it this week. It'll be handed off to the duplicators. But the Serpent Mound is featured in all three films. It's the largest snake effigy on the planet. It's absolutely humongous, and it corresponds the undulations of the serpent, which is of course made of earth. And Chief Joseph posits that at one point in time it may have had mica on the sides of it. So this thing would have just shone, kind of like the limestone casing stones in the Great Pyramid. It just would have just radiated sun. You see it for miles around. But when you're at the Serpent Mound, I've been there 3 times, and you look at it from the ground, you kind of go, well, I don't really understand what it is I'm looking at. They've got pictures of this thing, and I know it's a serpent, but you really can't appreciate it. You fly the drone like we did, 200-300 feet above the Serpent Mound, and all of a sudden, that snake effigy, serpent effigy, comes into focus in ways that are absolutely mind-boggling. And it begs the question, why, whoever's doing this, why are the builders building the snake? Why is it that the undulations of the serpent's body correspond to solar alignments, correspond to equinoxes, moon rises, solstices? It's incredibly complex. And frankly, Native Americans did not travel in this type of earthwork for the most part. Yes, they built some small burial mounds. We know that. But they certainly did not build a Serpent Mound, in my opinion. And what's interesting is there's new signage there now. And we drill into this in the film. And Chief Joseph Riverwind, a Tiano Peace Chief, comes on the record and basically states that the Shawnee did not build it. And yet when you go to the Serpent Mound, the signage that is there at the Serpent Mound insists that the Shawnee did build it. And the Shawnee chief, Chief Wallace, comes on the record and states, we respected the Serpent Mound, but in no way did we rebuild this. So history is being managed by the higher-ups who negate the oral tradition of the Native Americans and will tell us basically what to think, which I find incredibly insulting. Of course, if I make a statement like that the Native Americans did not build a Serpent Mound, somehow that's deemed as a racist statement. But nothing could be further from the truth. The real racism here is the powers that be who are insisting that the Shawnee built it when the Shawnee's oral tradition and the Shawnee chief says, no, we didn't build it.
You see,
so
this is
what's
like
going on here?
Egypt, to me, I've always kind of speculated that the Egyptians, those pyramids, or at least the ones on the Giza Plateau, were certainly there before they came along. And it sounds like it's a similar story you're telling here about the Serpent Mound. And why the snake, Ellie? I mean, this is the reptilian kind of angle that I've been looking at recently. What's the academic kind of party line for why they chose the snake?
Well, they'll always go to that because the serpent allegedly denotes wisdom, and it was something that was easy to draw. It was something that's universally held. And I get that. An archaeologist, or anyone for that matter, that doesn't hold to a biblical prophetic narrative would come up with something like that. But what's interesting is, and this is the work of an amateur archaeologist, Mark Hirschman, who came up to me with this probably 3 years ago now, and said, LA, I was just at the Serpent Mound, and after hearing Gary Stearman, this was at the Nephilim Mounds conference that we did in Newark, Ohio. After hearing Gary Stearman speak about the seed war and having just been out to the Serpent Mound, I think what that is refers to Genesis 3:15. So it was like an 8-cushion shot. What I mean by that, here's Mark Hirschman in the audience listening to Gary Stearman at the Nephilim Mounds conference. And while he's listening, he had just come from a Serpent Mound several days earlier. So it's fresh in his mind. And Gary Stearman is talking about the seed war. It's all about the seed, which is the title of his presentation. And in that presentation, he quotes Genesis 3:15, which in my opinion is, unless an individual understands the implications of Genesis 3:15, they remain ignorant of what's really going on in the biblical prophetic narrative. Genesis 3:15, it's a grouping. The stage is set with Adam and Eve, who have just eaten the forbidden fruit. The serpent, who, by the way, was talking to Eve, and that didn't alarm her at all. And that's a 3-hour conversation. So the serpent's talking to Eve, and they eat of the forbidden fruit. And then I believe the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one, is also in the garden. And Jesus says to the serpent, your seed, your offspring will be at enmity, at war with this offspring or the seed of the woman. He, meaning the offspring of the woman, will crush your head, you will bruise his heel. That sets up the rest of the seed war, the rest of the biblical prophetic narrative, which is a seed war. 3 chapters later, the eruption of the seed war fully manifests in Genesis 6 with the presence of a Nephilim. So unless a person knows that and understands the Genesis 3:15 narrative, when they get to the Serpent Mound, in my opinion, they don't understand what they're looking at. Now that's my take on it. Of course, archaeologists, mainstream archaeology, would poo-poo that, but that's what it is. And that's that serpent that undulates over the ground in Ohio. Its mouth is wide open, and in front of it is an egg, a disc. And that serpent is in the act, in my opinion, of swallowing, of destroying that egg. Why? It's the iconography there hails back to the Genesis 3:15 narrative. It's trying to destroy the seed of the woman. That's what it's all about. And of course, that's a new paradigm that's never been really put forth. Certainly archaeological circles have never done that. It's only because of our biblical worldview and Mark Hirschman putting 2 and 2 together with Gary Stearman's talk or presentation on It's All About the Seed, that we have that paradigm in operation now. And frankly, if I can go out on a limb here, Kev, I think it is the correct paradigm. I think that Serpent Mound, because of its astronomical alignments, its relationship to the summer solstice, the mouth was wide open to the solstice. And why do this? There was also an altar that was based there. There was also a pillar, which we know where the pillar is. We've actually filmed there, but we want to actually excavate it and bring it back up and reinsert it where it allegedly was. And also we want to see if there's writing on that pillar. So the Serpent Mound, in my opinion, is a smoking gun that reflects.
So that sounds like an obelisk. Is that right? What you're kind of theorizing here is an obelisk. That would be phenomenal. And I like how you kind of put everything into context there. Again, we can't use that as direct evidence, but it makes a lot more sense of the story that we are commonly fed. And I like this commonality that we see with the obelisk, for example, and these great giant works between the Egypt and over in America as well. There's definitely, in my opinion, some commonality there. And this always happens, LA, right? It doesn't matter what scientists you speak to. They're very unwilling to look at the full picture, i.e. biblical narratives, ancient evidence, civilizations, oral mythology, things like that. And it only gives them such a limited kind of data set then to make their theories from.
Well, what's interesting is most academics have an anti-supernatural worldview. They don't believe in anything supernatural. if I can go out on a bit of a limb here, most of them are Darwinists, meaning that all this that we see, all life on this planet, just spontaneously evolved from primordial slime over billions and billions of years. Well, that's interesting, but just show me one species which is evolving today. Show me one species which is becoming something else, and we don't see it. And the reason why we don't see it is because of a deoxyribonucleic acid, the DNA, the double helix, the spiral of life, which is a code which is embedded in every living organism on this planet. When you take an acorn seed and you drop that white oak tree seed into the dirt and you germinate it and you water it and you take care of it, you get an oak tree. You don't get a penguin. You don't get a hummingbird. You don't get a plum. You don't get an asparagus plant. You get an oak tree. Why? Because the DNA is embedded in that seed, just like the DNA is embedded in human beings and chimpanzees and everything else. So it's all about the seed. But the Darwinists are anti-supernatural. They have an anti-supernatural bias. In our third film, which again will be released very shortly, Secrets of the Supernatural, Voices from the Other Side, what we discovered in Minorque earth mounds is incredible. And I'll just tease your audience. There's a former pastor. He still is a pastor, but he was pastoring a church in Newark, Ohio. And he was called out to a house that was built on a mound, and this family was delving into things that they shouldn't delve into, i.e. seances, whatever. And he walks in, and the table was levitating. So this is the type of stuff that's going on around the mounds. There's other supernatural, paranormal activity that's directly linked to these areas. And we drill into that in the third offering.
Ellie, would I be kind of jumping the gun then and thinking that maybe you're going to factor in ley line activity, something like this, into episode 3?
Not so much ley line activity. We're going to get into that later, especially when we come over to your neck of the woods.
Yeah.
And we'll be talking to people like Hugh Newman and others about the ley lines. Specifically, and I can't give this away, we went to another site in the Americas, which we will call the Axis Mundi, the center of the world, because of its connectivity to multiple sites that we all know. And that'll be released probably, maybe late fall. So we're trying to do 4 films a year, basically every 3 months come up with a new film. It's a lot of work. I do all the editing. For this trip, we've hired a cameraman, so I'm not wearing all the hats that way, which is fantastic. But Jessica does a great job with the cameras. And, with guerrilla filmmaking, we've got these little Sony DSLRs which shoot in 4K and are just incredible. So the films are about an hour long each. 2 of them are out. We're talking about Mathematical Mysteries of the Mound Builders now, but eventually the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th and on it will go. I want to talk to you, Kev, if I can, about one of the aspects that we discovered with Mathematical Mysteries. We hired a surveyor. The guy's name was Todd Willis. And Todd went into the Circle Mountain. And we hired him to do this. We wanted to see how level the moat was. Now, the Great Circle Mountain is about 1,250 feet in diameter. In the interior of that circle, there is a moat. And that moat in some places, for the most part, is minimum 6 feet deep, minimum, okay? But be that as it may, we hired Todd to figure out, was the moat level? How would you do that in antiquity with stone tools or antlers? How would you do that? And so Todd took modern day surveying equipment, GPR, satellite equipment, and to his astonishment and to ours, he found out that the moat was about 6 inches to a foot dead level. And he agrees, as I do, that differentiation can certainly be attributed to just slough coming in over thousands of years. The Circle Mountain is at least, I would say it's well over 2,000 years, probably 2,500. But those dates are debatable, and archaeologists will debate things, and some of them will put an earlier date, and then some will put a latter date. But it's over 2,000 years in my opinion.
And Ellie,
The bottom line.
This is
Go
one of
ahead,
the
Kev.
reasons why, even as a young kid, I didn't compute, or it didn't compute with me that you had this high level of precision in these ancient monuments, these earthworks. And yet the given story is that it's like hunter-gatherers at times doing this with the very, very basic tools. None of that just works for me, dude. None of it.
Well, it doesn't. I mean, the idea that how would you create a moat that's, and this is, you say 1,250 feet, that's the diameter. Now you've got the interior of a circumference, which is a lot more than that. It's a lot of work, and that moat is deep, and there's no water source. So Todd Willis goes, well, we had to bring water in. Okay, well, how are they bringing in the water? There's no fire hydrants, and there's no PVC pipe as we know it. So what you're trying to tell me is you're digging a little bit, flooding it to see if, and digging another compartment to see if it's, I mean, how are you going to do this in the ancient world? You can level it with water, I get it, but where's the manpower coming from? Who's doing this? These are allegedly our hunter-gatherers. And I just read a report that was used in the Smithsonian Institute well over 150 years ago now, which basically stated that the indigenous tribes in America did not have the manpower and the resources to construct things like this. They just didn't. Of course, all of this was changed in the late 19th century, 1894, when Cyrus Thomas took control of the Smith and insisted that Native Americans built all these artifacts, but they just forgot that they had done so. This is why when you see the signage getting back of a Serpent Mound, oh, the Shawnee built the Serpent Mound. But the Shawnee says, no, we didn't build a Serpent Mound, and our oral tradition tells us we didn't build a Serpent Mound. So you've got a false narrative, which is deliberately being foisted on the peoples of the world, and that, Kev, is deliberate deception, in my opinion.
And when you speak to these Native American elders and things, Ellie, is there any oral tradition, any stories of giants, Nephilim type entities in amongst there?
Well, even the Smithsonian are digging up 7 and 8 footers, very common. 7-foot skeletons, 8-foot skeletons are very common all throughout their reports. 7 feet doesn't sound like a really big guy. And we're not saying that Native Americans couldn't have produced someone that's 7 feet. We get that. But the average Native American is about 5'3". So is it possible that the Nephilim migrated here from the ancient world 3,500 years ago when Joshua and Caleb were pursuing the conquest of the Promised Land? And our answer to that is yes. That is our hypothesis that that's why we're on the trail of the Nephilim. That's the overarching name of the series is On the Trail of the Nephilim. And so, yes, the idea that Native Americans talk about a race of giants who were cannibalistic, by the way, who had red hair, double rows of teeth, 6 fingers. That's in their oral tradition. And these early archaeologists from the 19th century recorded these giant skeletons, 7 and 8, and in some cases even taller. The one I found out on Catalina Island was just shy of 9 feet. So that's a really big guy. So something's going on here, Kev, and the fact that it's been deliberately obfuscated, hidden away, tells me that there's a managed agenda in academia, in the scientific community, to keep another paradigm from the American people and the peoples of the world. And that paradigm does 2 things, in my opinion. It validates the biblical prophetic narrative, and it validates the oral tradition of the First Nation people of the Native Americans.
Absolutely. Now, we've got a couple of minutes before we go to the break, Ellie. So let people know where they can get a hold of these DVDs. And if you've got any speaking engagements coming up as well, sir.
Well, I'm headed over to your neck of the woods here. So no speaking. The next thing is in July. It's the latter part of July. You'd have to go on my blog and check it out. That's in Lima, Ohio, with a whole host of other people. I know Russ Dizdar will be there, for instance. So it's going to be a good conference. Gen 6 conference, which is September 15th, the weekend of the 15th of September. That is a huge conference, upwards of 3,000 people. That's in Branson, Missouri. And I'm honored to be speaking with Steve Quayle, Timothy Alberino, Gary Stearman, and others. So it'll be really good. But if you're interested in the mathematical mysteries of the mound builders, or the mysterious mound builders, or the upcoming film, which is Secrets of a Supernatural, Voices from the Other Side, it's www.lamarzulli.net, lamarzulli.net, and you can procure the DVDs there. We're also from across the pond for you people in Europe and, of course, in the UK. And by the way, we got to get Brexit going, man. Got to get
Absolutely.
Brexit going.
We'll get more
It'll
of
be
this
on Vimeo soon.
with LA on the other side. Don't go anywhere, folks. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. L.A. Marzulli is my very special guest today, and this is like hanging out with a real-life Indiana Jones. We're standing in the face of the Nephilim today, right here on the Kev Baker Show. Check out his website, lamarzulli.net. We are on the trail of the Nephilim. In L.A., we're talking about the second DVD in this series, and it's the mathematical mysteries of the mound builders. I was going to ask you, what was the real standout moment for you? Was it one of these locations that you walked into, you got a feeling? Was it when you were presented with some of the mathematical kind of measurements and the obvious science that's on show in some of these works? What was it for you, Ellie?
Well, I mean, what really did it for me, Kev, was when we had a mathematician, Dorothy Isley, who basically looked at the octagon mound and the circle mound, and she looks right at the camera, and she basically says, this is advanced geometry. It's one thing to draw a little octagon on a piece of paper. If I gave you a ruler and said, draw an octagon, could you do it? Some people could do it, but without a protractor and knowing what the angles are, good luck. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You got to know what the angles are to draw. You know, it can do the base, but then you've got to do the sides. And how do you know if it's the same? You know, that's where a protractor comes in. So that was one thing. But then she looked at it and she said, well, this is an advanced mathematics, geometry, trigonometry, because what it has, it's an unequal octagon. And so, and again, drawing it on paper is one thing, but to do it over 30 acres, which is what it is, to create an octagon in dirt that's 30 acres, I mean, that's just mind-boggling. And, Kev, once again, you can only see it from the air. And we know this, that the Newark earthworks, I'm going to say 500,000 tons of earth. To give you an idea what 500,000 tons of earth look like, if you took a dump truck, okay, and filled that dump truck up with dirt, and you bump them up end to end like this, and you just line them all up, you would have, and am I exaggerating, over 200 miles of dump trucks to make the Newark earthworks. And that you didn't have in the ancient world, in my opinion. You didn't have the manpower or a support system to do this. Where are all the graves? Archaeologists, oh, it took them 300 years. Where are all the graves? Where are all the graveyards? They're not there. So if they're not there, then who's building these things? And they tried to show us that, or the archaeologists will tell us that everything is done with these primitive hoes. So we hired a flint maker who makes replicas of these hoes for museums. And we hired a fit laborer with this replica of the hoe. We went out and began to dig in the dirt, and we timed it. And he took 1 bucket of dirt, and it took him about 16 minutes to do that. And we estimated that for one of the mounds, one of the largest mounds in America, called Poverty Point, that there would be 28 million single buckets of earth. I'll say it again, 28 million single buckets of earth. Now that's incredibly profound, and it makes one wonder, you know, where's the community that's feeding these guys, clothing these guys? It just doesn't exist,
no,
in our opinion.
Absolutely. I'm sitting here shaking my head. I really am. But Poverty Point, this is somewhere I hadn't really heard about until listening to Graham, listening to yourself, researching for this show. Tell us about Poverty Point. What's going on there, Ellie?
Poverty Point is one of the oldest mounds in the Americas, if not perhaps even the oldest, maybe older than Cahokia. It's at least 5,000 years old. I mean, archaeologists use these dates, and it's hard to say. But the bottom line is, it's very, very old. And again, when I went there and talked to the archaeologist that was there, and I asked him a simple question: how many stone hoes have you found? He said, "Oh, about 25." Well, that doesn't work. There's 390,000 tons of earth estimated, an estimated 390,000 tons of earth to build Poverty Point, which is in the northern part of Louisiana. So with that in mind, we're looking at 28 million single buckets of earth to create Poverty Point, because that's what we took the earth very close to Poverty Point with this hoe that we had a replica made out of. And the whole theory just collapses of its own weight. There's not enough people, there's not enough food resources. No one knows who the people that made Poverty Point called themselves. And you remember, Poverty Point is not what this was called. That's the white man's name for it, Poverty Point. No one knows who the people were who made it or why they made it. There's also advanced trigonometry, which is embedded in Poverty Point itself, which aligns, again, solstice alignments, isosceles triangles, and it's all very, very deliberate. Whoever was doing this did it with great deliberation because they could do it. They're not having a problem, just like when you go down into Peru in the places like Sacsayhuaman or Ollantaytambo or Machu Picchu, and you see these giant megalithic stones which are knitted together perfectly, polygonal shapes. Well, the Inca don't have the tools. The Inca don't have the tools to create these. They had copper chisels. And as a colleague of ours, Brian Forrester, pointed out many, many years ago, and we've since shown that the Inca, or a copper tool, basically dulls with one or two hits and it's over. That's it. No more. You can take a piece of andesite and a copper chisel and go dink, dink, and the thing is dull. So you can't cut andesite with copper. So that, once again, it's being told. You go down the Sacsayhuaman, and the guy will tell you, oh, the Inca built this with copper chisels. They were master stone builders. We're saying not so fast, citizen. We're looking at the fingerprints of the supernatural. And I believe that Sacsayhuaman is more than likely pre-flood. It was destroyed in the flood, the biblical flood of Noah. So once again, for your listeners, there is a hidden history, which is deliberately obfuscated. Heck, over in the UK, you've got Stonehenge and all the area around Stonehenge, the great curses, the lesser curses. You've got Salisbury, you've got Amesbury. I mean, you've got these sites which are absolutely incredible. And we'll be filming there in this year, actually. We're headed over to your neck of the woods. We will be filming there.
They're so concentrated in that kind of one location of the UK as well. And that's quite interesting to me. There was obviously something going on there way back in the day that we haven't been told about. And these were people, entities that had various high knowledge in astronomy, in the building, the science. And again, we go back to this greatest story never told. And can I factor in Göbekli Tepe? Would that come into this storyline as well?
Well, that's a site that I would love to go see, but because it's in Turkey, unless Turkey
risky.
changes political leanings, I would never go there. But yes, Tepe is an unbelievable site that was completely buried, and it makes you wonder, why bury this thing? And I believe it's very ancient. I would say it's pre-flood, which was created. There are animals which are on the menhirs or the megaliths, which we don't have today. So what are we looking at here?
And
Folks,
again, we're speculating.
There is a hidden history.
Yeah, we're speculating, Ellie, but I mean, if it is pre-flood, then is there any way that these Nephilim would have known that this flood was coming, and that would explain the massive undertaking of literally covering all of it in? And people, bear in mind, what we see at Göbekli Tepe is brilliant. However, they estimate maybe only 10% of that's been uncovered so far.
Yeah, it's many sites are like this. I mean, even in Peru, there are sites which people know about and they've never been excavated. Even here in the Americas, there are mounds, let's say in Cahokia, that we would love to be able to go excavate, but you can't, and they've never been excavated, so we have no idea what's in them. So if any of you folks are out there in Ohio who are listening that know of a mound that's never been excavated on your property, we can excavate if it is private property in Ohio. So at least we're not stopped, and we've got several that we're looking at. Nothing is really playing out yet, but we had one excavation that we were actually working on, and so far nothing, but who knows?
Is there any potential pyramids in North America that are yet to be kind of uncovered, Ellie? We see the very contentious one over in Bosnia, but any structures of any interest that you would like to get your hands on, get areas you'd like to get into?
Well, I mean, I don't really know. They're finding things all the time. Again, there are mounds in the United States which have never been excavated. I believe that they haven't looked at everything. There may be caves with giant skeletons that are still entombed in those caves. Kentucky would be a really good place to look at that. We have reports of those coming from the 19th century. So they were there. The people, the white settlers that were pushing into these uncharted areas were finding these. And this is what led to the whole idea of an ancient race that predated the First Nation Native American people. So the First Nation, while they call themselves First Nation, they indeed might not have been First Nation. The Nephilim tribes may have been over here, which is conjecture. That's our hypothesis. I'm not saying that these are Nephilim, but the evidence seems to be pointing to the validity of our hypothesis. Not only the fact that you've got red hair, 6 fingers, double rows of teeth, but that the DNA that we did with our Paracas skulls, and that was our team that did that. Our team, Mondo Gonzalez, Rick Woodward, Richard Shaw, Chase Klotsky, that was our team. And of course, Brian Forrester, with our boots on the ground, and helped as liaison between us and the archaeologist Ruben Soto. But it took thousands, tens of thousands of dollars from our donor to get to that point. And that DNA evidence was presented in our film, which we're kind of remaking here. I'll just tip my hand. That'll be number 4 in the series of On the Trail, because we want to talk about the DNA evidence and establish that so people understand that what was in Peru originated in the Middle East. And I believe that if we could get DNA from some of these ancient skeletons found in the Americas, we would also find a Middle Eastern/European origin.
See, that's what I really like about you, Ellie. You go to the sites in question. You're not an armchair researcher like myself typically. And not only that, but you also go for that scientific evidence that's going to really back up everything that you say. And that's really rare. And I have to thank you for the extra lengths you go to, you and your team, to do that. And the DNA evidence, I mean, that would be the smoking gun. And I remember we spoke about DNA in the past. One of your most brilliant videos you've done as well, I still love it to this day, is The Giant of Kandahar. And I wonder, it's going out into the realms of speculation here, but if they have recovered one of these Nephilim, they've obviously sequenced the DNA, and I'm sure there would be some traits stored within that code that would be very advantageous now that they're looking at with biological kind of tweaking, CRISPR and things, longevity, all that kind of stuff. It's pure speculation, Ellie, but do you think they've got that DNA that you're searching for?
Absolutely. I think it's been the powers that be have had this for decades. And I was actually approached by a guy from the deep state when Watchers 10 came out, which is the Giant of Kandahar DNA. And, you know, Richard Shaw, the director and producer of the Watchers series, Rick directed and edited all the films and co-produced it, and I was the other co-producer. But it was a good team. We did 10 of these things together. And I think our one of our most watched ones is the one on the Kandahar Giant, Watchers 10. And what's interesting about that, Kev, is when we went out with that, I was approached by a guy from the deep state who basically threatened me in the same way Alex Jones is being threatened now, with kiddie porn on the cell phone. So I'm saying that right here. I was threatened 3 ways. One, if they would come and arrest me, they would find kiddie porn on my cell phone or my computer. 2, that what kind of car did I drive? Well, I drive a 1991 classic car. I did before the fire destroyed everything. And he asked me, well, was there a computer on it? I said, well, yes, there is. And he said, well, we can take control of that car and make it crash. Several months after that initial contact with this guy from the deep state, my serpentine belt mysteriously broke while driving up a very windy road at 50 miles an hour or faster. And it looked like it had been cut in 3 different places. And had my wife been driving it, it would have gone over the cliff. There's no guardrails on this particular canyon road in the Santa Monica Mountains. The third thing I was threatened with was one of my children would go missing. So this is the way the game is played, and the fact that Alex Jones now is being accused of having kiddie porn. This is how the game is played, and I don't believe for a second.
Look how they use their own crimes. Typically, the stuff that they're into to come after genuine researchers. And I've always said, there's classifications of truth, and some truth is dangerous. And I would imagine when you're on the trail of this kind of stuff, Ellie, and the fact that this relates to a supernatural force that in many regards our governments today do the bidding for, then this is going to be the kind of thing that gets you in trouble.
Well, it is. And I remember looking at this guy and just saying, everything that you said is true. I mean, you can take me out in a New York minute. I get that. But you can't do anything to me unless the Most High God allows it. And that's what I'm banking on. The fact that people pray for us on a daily level, that I just believe a power greater than the prince of the power of the air, which is the King, Jesus. And I believe he's coming back sooner than later. In fact, our mission statement is to expose the deception of the prince of the power of the air and to herald the return of the King, Jesus. And as you said earlier, that it's becoming the veil that separates us from the supernatural is growing thin. And what we see is the outright lawlessness throughout the world. And to me, that's very telling, Kev, of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely, because we briefly talked about censorship before the show, and it would appear anything that has any kind of religious slant to it, and in particular Christian, there seems to be a massive push to occult anything that's to do with Christianity. Have you faced this at all, Ellie?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, anything at all, conservative, Christian, bam, it's immediately dealt with. In fact, there was an article over the weekend by one of CNN's goofy hosts, Allison Camerata, who basically said her job was to make sure that no conservative speech was, basically met the airwaves unchallenged. So there's an agenda to deliberately go after people with a Christian perspective or a conservative Christian perspective, conservative Christian worldview. Everything is tolerance, 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 one world government. And it's not working out so well for the powers that be, as you know, with Theresa May and the Brexit debacle. I mean, she's still tap dancing. She's a New World Order puppet, in my opinion. And I realize that people love her over there. Some people do, but
not so much here, Ellie. Not so much here.
Yeah, not so much. And it's like, this woman is a New World Order shell, in my opinion. That's speculation on my part, but that's what she is, and that's why people voted for Brexit. Oh, well, we don't like that vote. It's kind of like Hillary Clinton over here. Well, I should have been president. Well, no, you shouldn't have, Hillary. I mean, it's just the way it works. So
I'm glad you see the parallels, because there are definite parallels to the way people reacted about Hillary Clinton not getting in, and the way that our government has not gone with the will of the people. The parallels are there for all to see. And again, this New World Order, again, it might be humans that run it down on this planet, but there's a supernatural force behind this. And this is what Ellie and I have been talking about tonight. It's nothing new, but it definitely does seem to be ramping up in these times, Ellie, be it the fact we're punching holes into other dimensions, some of the things that are going on the planet. I don't know what it is, but it's all kind of culminating in this thinning of the veil to the point where there is no really boundary between the supernatural and the natural world anymore.
Well, and we're seeing it. It's ramping up. I mean, in episode 3, another teaser, we talk about the Mayan elders who show up at all these sites with the crystal skulls. So one of the questions that we ask, and Chief Joseph does a wonderful job in addressing it, and other people that come on the show as well, why the Mayan elders coming up here with 13 crystal skulls and performing rituals on the Serpent Mound and at Cahokia and at the North Circle Mound? Why are they doing that? What the heck is going on here? With full dress, and they're calling down, they're opening up the gateways. They know, they know who it is that they serve, and it's not the same people, or it's not the same entities that we as Christians serve. We serve the risen Savior, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, the Anointed One, and they're not serving him by any means. So it's we're at loggerheads here. We are ramping up, I believe, Kev, to the time of Jacob's trouble, a time unlike any other time, which is written more about in the Bible than the only other thing that's written more about that than the time of Jacob's trouble is the birth of the Messiah. And the time of Jacob's trouble deals with Israel being regathered into its ancient homeland, which is what we see, which, by the way, is unprecedented. And it's a one world government system. It's a one world financial system. And people can't buy or trade without the mark of the beast, which is another Watchers series that we did in 7 and 8. But I digress. The bottom line, Kev, is that it is ramping up. I go all over America and I ask people, how many of you think we're better off now than we were, let's say, 20 years ago? Not a hand goes up. Not one hand. For years now, no one ever says, yeah, we're better off. People instinctively, viscerally know that something isn't right. They can't put their finger on it. Maybe they don't articulate it the way you and I have here in this interview, but they know that they're not in Kansas anymore and things are different.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the technology, it's on an exponential curve going up the way, yet humanity itself, we seem to be kind of going backwards at the same time. And I do think people are now starting to kind of get that feeling that there's something not quite right here. But what can people do for themselves if they are feeling that way, Ellie?
Well, honestly, I think the first thing a person needs to do would be to crack open the guidebook of the supernatural, i.e. the Bible, and read the Gospel of John. Just read it. Most people have actually never read it. Oh, yeah, I know all about the Bible. Have you actually read the Gospel of John? Well, no, but I think I know what's in it. I used to go to church. Read the Gospel of John, the good news. Gospel just means good news. Read the good news of John and understand that the one who came here was prophesied thousands of years before he came here. And wherever he went, he brought goodness. And folks, I'm not talking about religion or the established church per se. There's some good ones out there, but there's a lot of nonsense out there too. I'm talking about a personal relationship with the risen Savior, Jesus, the Messiah. That's what I'm talking about. That's what turned the pagan ancient world on its head 2,000 years ago. That's what changed everything. That is why we have the freedoms that we enjoy in the Western world. It's nowhere else. It's nowhere else. And you can make a strong case that the freedoms and the advancements in science and the arts and literature and basically the modern world as we know it came from the Protestant Reformation. That was the wellspring. That was the springboard, which catapulted us into modernity. And that's not a racist statement. That's just a statement of fact.
And Ellie, before I let you go, it certainly won't have slipped your attention the fact that there's been so much talk, both officially and unofficially, online about the UFO kind of things that are going on right now, the UFO topic. And you're one of the few Christian speakers out there who happily addresses the whole UFO scene. What do you make of what's going on right now? Because my spidey senses are going off, brother.
Well, and mine too. What we're looking at is soft disclosure. On my Acceleration radio show last week, I talked about Luis Elizondo coming on the record and stating, you can see it right back there, the whole UFO disclosure book. I wrote that because in 2017, that's when we crossed the line in the sand on Tucker Carlson's show. And Tucker asked Commander David Fravor, what did he encounter? And Fravor said, I'm giving you the shorthand readers, digest version of it. And Fravor said, looks right at the camera and said, whatever this was not of this world. Fast forward to several weeks ago with Luis Elizondo, who states on Tucker Carlson yet again, when Tucker asked him, does the United States government have in its possession debris from a crashed UFO? Elizondo looks right at the camera and says, yes. And Tucker asks it again, And Elizondo repeats the answer. Yes, we do. He doesn't say we do. He says, Tucker, I can't elaborate, but the simple answer, the short answer is yes. So he just admits on national television that will go worldwide that the United States government has in its possession debris, wreckage from a downed UFO. Disclosure is happening. Elizondo brought us up to the second rung.
Is that because these entities are getting close to make a return, do you think, Ellie? Because governments time everything for a reason. And I appreciate I'm getting you to speculate here, brother.
I would concur. The time is now for this to happen. And I think that when they finally do reveal it, I think the next thing we'll see are some really good high definition pictures, i.e. video. We might actually see what one of the grays actually look like, other than fuzzy videos that we've seen. We may see a real photograph of the generals or even Eisenhower, like was talked about, actually having contact. We'll see. That's the next rung on the ladder. Some kind of picture or photographic video evidence, because we went up another ring on the ladder. It is deliberate. It is a managed agenda. And the end game here is to completely turn the entire planet on its head. And it will do that.
Absolutely. L.A. Marzulli, everyone check out his website over at lamarzulli.net. We've been talking about On the Trail of the Nephilim, Episode 2, The Mathematical Mysteries of the Mound Builders. Ellie, thank you so much for your time, sir. And everything.
Thank you. Yeah, see, really appreciate it.
It was worth waiting for, Ellie. It really was. We'll be back after the break. Ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere.